The Modern Plantation: How Family Courts Perpetuate the Alienation of Afro-Descendant Fathers. The Invisible Chains of the Family Court System. The history of the Afro-descendant family in the Americas is one defined by both incredible resilience and systemic assault. To understand the modern family court system, one must look at the parallels to the plantation system of the past. Under that old, cruel architecture, the family unit was intentionally fractured. The father was a figure to be utilized for labor, but stripped of his authority and presence within his own household. Today, while the whips and chains have been replaced by dockets and petitions, the outcome remains hauntingly similar: the systemic alienation of dedicated Black and Afro-Latino fathers from their children. Take, for example, a recent case unfolding in our own community involving a dedicated father and his child's mother. For a decade, they maintained a mutual 50-50 time-sharing agreement. The father spent his life building stability, ensuring that his child had financial, medical, and academic support. Yet, in the summer of 2025, a series of strategic maneuvers by the mother alienated the father for financial gain, leveraging teenage rebellion and filing unfounded allegations of abuse. The mother effectively radicalized the child against the father through manipulation, while she rallied the zealous female-dominated family court to systemically alienate the father without questioning whether or not the narrative given by the mother was true or not. In less than 2 months, 16 years of dedicated parenting was sidelined by a system that often prioritizes mother's narrative, regardless of the quality of care or stability offered by the father. This is not an isolated incident. It is a mirror reflecting a broader societal injustice where the court and child services strip productive and dedicated fathers of their rights, often working in favor of less favorable conditions simply because they align with antiquated gender biases. The disparity of unification. There is a glaring disparity in how family unification is treated across ethnic lines. Statistics consistently show that white American families often have greater access to the legal resources and societal benefit of the doubt that keep fathers integrated. In contrast, Black and Afro-Latino fathers are frequently viewed through a lens of suspicion. When a mother in these communities uses a child as a pawn to maintain housing benefits or satisfy a personal vendetta, the court often lacks the nuance or judgment to see the exploitation. In the case of discussion, the mother allegedly used the child's dependent status to secure subsidized housing while remaining chronically unemployed. In addition, she vacated the unit to live with her boyfriend, while one of her adult children from a previous relationship was manipulated into occupying it to hold it in place. Such scenarios create a perverse incentive. The system rewards the displacement of the father. When the court devalues a father who provides stability, the narrative is skewed, viewing his structure as control, his discipline as abuse, and his guidance as manipulation. It reinforces a narrative that the father is an optional or even a detrimental component of the home. This is the modern translation of the plantation, the removal of the patriarch to maintain a state of dependency on the welfare system, which can then be leveraged to dictate to the mother and her children. The cost of alienation: crime, equity, and dysfunction. The consequences of parental alienation are not confined to the walls of the courtroom. They spill into our streets and bank accounts. There is a direct correlation between the forced absence of attentive fathers and the cycle of dysfunction in our communities. For example, higher crime rates. The lack of stable, structured male presence is a primary driver for youth entering the justice system. When a father's know-how to become a prosperous man is stripped away, a void is left. that the streets are all too happy to fill. Another example, lower financial equity. By prioritizing full support amounts over physical presence, the court often drain the financial resources of the productive parent to subsidize a rule-free zone elsewhere. This prevents the accumulation of intergenerational wealth within the Afrocentric community and maintains dependency on the estate. Another example is educational decline. The absence of the father's oversight often leads to a drop in academic performance and behavioral issues. When a child is taught to parrot the undermining statements about their father, the emotional trauma creates a lifelong rift and an underlying lack of respect for the male role model in general. Members of the community in discussion are well aware of the ramifications of this predicament. We are essentially breeding generations of youth who see their fathers as wallets or enemies rather than mentors and advocates. Educational and crime performance, Afro-American and Afro-Latino communities. Research on the impact of family structure, particularly the presence of father, suggests significant correlations with educational and criminal outcomes for boys across various communities. In the United States, these trends are often overlapping with socioeconomic status and racial identity. Studies focused on African American and Afro-Latino communities indicate that the presence of a father is a strong predictor of stability. For example, educational performance. Boys from father-present households are approximately 40% less likely to repeat a grade and significantly less likely to drop out of school. Father involvement is associated with higher levels of pro-social behavior and academic motivation. Conversely, fatherless boys in these communities are twice as likely to drop out of high school. Another example, crime statistics. Multiple studies, including those by the U.S. Department of Justice, indicate that roughly 70 to 85% of youth in correctional facilities come from fatherless homes. In African American communities, boys from single-parent households are at a higher risk of juvenile delinquency. Comparative analysis. Communities with no family history of slavery. When comparing these results to communities without a family history of slavery, example, recently voluntary African immigrants, Asian Americans, or European Americans, the father effect remains consistent, but the baseline socioeconomic starting point often differs. Recent African or voluntary immigrants. Data suggests that children of voluntary Black immigrants, who often do not share the generational trauma of systemic barriers associated with the legacy of American slavery, frequently exhibit higher educational attainment. This is often attributed to higher initial levels of parental education and different community networks. Two-parent advantage. Across all racial groups, boys in the two-parent households typically have access to 60 to 100% more household income than those in single-parent households. This financial cushion acts as a buffer against crime, as it provides access to better funded school districts and extracurricular engagement. International comparative analysis. The United States has one of the highest rates of single-parent households in the industrialized world. In the United Kingdom, for example, research shows similar trends. Boys from father-absent homes are more likely to engage in antisocial behavior. However, the UK's social safety net, healthcare and housing, can sometimes mitigate the extreme poverty crime link seen in the United States. Scandinavia, for example, in countries like Sweden or Norway, single parenthood is relatively common but does not correlate as strongly with crime and educational failure. This suggests that when the state provides robust economic support, the father absence factor becomes less of a predictor for criminal outcomes than it is in the United States. It is worth mentioning these countries also promote a more egalitarian approach between the genders. Unfortunately, for Afrocentric communities in the United States, there is an uneven distribution of poverty driven by historical systemic discrimination, in addition to extreme workplace penalties commonly associated with single parenthood. Communities in the United States do not have such a stable economic floor, resources, or programs available to single-parent households. Prevalence in New York City. In New York City, these dynamics are intensified by high density and residential segregation. For example, New York City demographics. As of recent data, over 50% of Black and Latino children in NYC live in single-parent households compared to roughly 20% of white children. Another example, educational impact. New York City schools in high poverty areas where father absence is more prevalent report higher rates of chronic absenteeism. For example, some schools in the Bronx or East New York see chronic absence rates exceeding 40%, which is a primary precursor to dropping out. Another example is the school-to-prison pipeline. In NYC, there is a noted correlation between neighborhoods with high rates of fatherlessness and high rates of juvenile arrest. Community-based organizations such as My Brother's Keeper specifically target New York City boys in these neighborhoods to provide the mentorship traditionally offered by present fathers. A call for justice and solutions. The devaluation of the Afro-American father must end. We must protest a system that allows a parent to bribe a child with the incentive of minimal obligations. This undermines the more stable household model. In the mentioned case, the father struggled with having to wait a couple of months for CPS to deem the mother's false accusations as unfounded while being denied access to his child. This is an injustice that no dedicated parent or child should endure. Proposed solutions for stronger father presence. Number 1, the presumption of 50-50 custody or support. The law should begin with the assumption that equal time and equal financial responsibility is in the best interest of the child, unless proven otherwise by clear evidence of detriment. A child's sense of security is rooted in predictable and responsive emotional bonds, rather than a geographic location. These emotional anchors help the child to thrive and model after the example of both parents. 2, accountability for false allegations. There must be legal and financial consequences for parents who weaponize child services to gain tactical advantages in custody battles. 3, judicial and administrative transparency. Conduct independent oversight of judicial officers, referees, and magistrates to eliminate false reporting, arbitrary document demands, and procedural delays. And 4, economic protection. Support arrangements should not be finalized until custody is settled, preventing the custody for cash scheme that keeps many fathers in financial ruin. We must stop persecuting dedicated fathers through systemic bias. If we want to heal our communities and break the cycle of poverty and crime, we must start by honoring the men who have dedicated their lives to raising their children to the best of their abilities. It is time to let fathers take their rightful place in their children's lives.